The bell is rung on round one, and we roll into round two in the divisional finals right now on the Junior Beast Pod on Crowlax TV.
That's Klucha, and he goes short side low.
The Rebels are right back in it. All alone, he's stopped by Luke West. And Kerr,
What?
7 seconds is all it took for Kerr.
Quick shot scores. Jacob Goudreau.
Takes a shot and buries that.
It was a round of sweeps in the North, the South, and the Central. All saw their series ending in 2. The Warriors, the Mountaineers, and the Mavericks all coming out victorious. Keenen, it was a not so wild round one as we look to go into divisional round weekend.
Yeah, no, it was definitely, I wouldn't say it was necessarily a quiet weekend, but it was definitely one that I think, given my predictions last week on the pod, let's just say I was definitely proven wrong. We'll get into that a bit later.
I don't know. I guess somewhat, but not. It's not like you were absolutely slaughtered. You still did get, I think, 2 out of the 3 teams correct. So let's go with a first round recap before we dive into round 2 and some pretty tantalizing matchups on championship weekend. And let's start off in the South, where the Mountaineers, with a minor upset, taking down the Marauders 2-0 by scores of 10-9 and 7-4. And the Mountaineers actually went down 3-0 in the first game before coming back and then holding the lead sort of throughout. The game got tied up a couple of times. The Mountaineers, the rest of the way, sort of had a 1-2 goal lead with the Marauders hanging around. But eventually the Mountaineers came out on top. And in game 1, Dunbar and Jacob Harlow with big 7-point games. So the guys you'd expect really showed up on the score sheet a bunch. And on the Mountaineers side of things, Cohen Flouet and Dame leading the way, with Flouet putting up 3 goals, 2 assists, 5-point game for him. And he would actually have 2 5-point games. We'll get to that a little bit later. But really, the Mountaineers in the end were able to avenge getting swept last year. They in turn come back and sweep the Marauders. So those 2 teams exchanged sweeps in each of the last 2 years. And Okotoks bows out after what was a very up and down sort of season that didn't really ever get on track. And that's going to send the Mountaineers off to the South Final where they take on the Shamrocks. Anything to add here?
I think if I remember correctly last week, I had the Marauders winning this series in 3. So I think I actually only went 1 for 3 in last week's predictions. However, I will say I'm not overly surprised by the result, because I do agree, I don't think everything went right for the Marauders this year, and I think had they have had a chance to go back, obviously if you have a chance to go back, you want to change a lot of things. But I just think the Marauders, I agree, they weren't able to catch their legs, and the Mountaineers, they were able to just pounce on that and, knock them out in round number 1. With that, it's going to be one hell of a series between the Mountaineers and the Shamrocks. And interesting to note, just before we recorded this podcast, maybe like 30 minutes beforehand, we got the South Division schedule. All 3 games are being played in the Stupid. So the Mounties, we know in round 1 they didn't get the Acadia, but it's going to be interesting that they're playing all the games in the Shamrocks barn, even though the Shamrocks are technically the away team for game number 2.
Yeah, and for anybody who hasn't been to that arena, it's a bit of an interesting setup. It's in a really nice area. Like, there's a nice park around it, a lot of field, there's a track. But it's the building itself, it gets really hot in there. There's actually like a ramp you walk up into the dressing rooms. So, guys that are hurt or whatever, sitting and want to get a little bit of cardio and could do so before the game by just walking up and down and doing some hill sprints inside the arena. It's a unique setup, but I think that always throws a wrench into things when all games are being played in the same venue. Obviously, those 2 teams are going to be very familiar with that arena. Shamrocks playing their home games out there, and the Mountaineers having played there plenty of times. So I don't think there's going to be any sort of advantage really to that. But just something that might factor in some small form as we move into round 2. Now let's go over to the north, where the Warriors made quick work of the Outlaws, 15-6 on Thursday night, and then they followed that up on Saturday evening with a 9-2 victory. And really, this was just a case of experience and talent being too much. The Warriors shooters were simply too much. Fodchuk and Dickin were dialed in for much of the series. I thought, the additions of Pickering and Harris go under the radar, but they've really added to help their transition game. Pickering's very aggressive in particular. Strong kid. A guy that provides just that little bit of a grit factor on their back gate. Really good on loose balls. Harris has fit in nicely. Scored a really nice goal in game 2. So I think some of those under the radar guys have made a difference. And really, I thought the Warriors did a good job of kind of taking control early of that series. And because the last thing you want to do is give an underdog life and belief. And I thought from game 1, like from the jump, first period, they did a good job of that. So they end up taking out the Outlaws 2-0. From an Outlaws perspective, I thought McLeod, the rookie goaltender, played quite well in game 2. He really held the fort, gave the Outlaws a chance. I thought they came out in the first few minutes and had some good looks. Maybe a goal early could have made that one tighter, made it felt a little bit different. But the Warriors were able to grab that early lead and never really looked back. I thought Peyton Cook had a really strong series. Big defender, physical, very good in transition, gets up and goes. And lastly, I want to take a little bit of time to acknowledge Connor Turner and Brett Murray also graduate out. A couple other veteran lefties, and I want to acknowledge all 3 of those guys. All classy guys. I've coached all of them, and I just want to wish them the best of luck as they move into different chapters, whether they continue playing or not. Hell of a ride, guys, and good luck with whatever's next. Keenan, North thoughts?
Looking at the North, I feel that the goal differential of 26-8, a huge goal differential first off in favor of the Warriors, but I don't think that fully puts into perspective the strides that the Outlaws have taken since last year. Because I know from watching them last year in the playoffs in the Larry Bishop to watching them this year and how they played against the Warriors, I think they took massive strides. And while the score sheet doesn't quite show it, I agree. I think the Warriors shooters just kind of made them look silly, quite frankly. But I think there's some little spots of hope and some silver linings on the Outlaws that moving into the future, even with the loss of guys like Murray and Turner, that the Outlaws do have a good future. So I'm excited to see where their season takes them in 2025. But anyway, great job from the Warriors. They were simply too much for the Outlaws, and I think I had said that if the Outlaws wanted to win a game, they had to play really strong defense against this Warrior offense, and unfortunately they just couldn't quite get the job done. And obviously with a 2-game sweep like that with that big of a goal differential, it's just an unfortunate end to that season for the Outlaws.
Yeah, and I thought that the Outlaws, as I think I said in the preview of the series, they had to get their looks in transition and win that sort of battle. And, they did get some good looks in transition. I just think that they had too much trouble accessing the middle of the floor in terms of offensive sets. And they were forced into a lot of bad quality shots, which obviously is a hard way to win. And I think the Warriors, at additions, like I was talking about earlier, just really supplemented their transition game, and it just made it hard to find an avenue to victory, I think, for a still young Outlaws team. So the Warriors sweep that series 2-0. They move on to take on the Fort Saskatchewan Rebels in a series that I believe starts Thursday night. Now let's shift over to the Central, where the Mavericks were able to take down the Chill in a very familiar 2-0 sweep. We saw that again in all three series. They win game 1, 8-5, and then follow that up with a, let's say, controversial 8-7 win, and we'll get to that in a second. But first, a quick recap of game 1. The Mavericks did a really good job when we talked about the Warriors going out to a early lead in each of their 2 games. The Mavericks actually got up 6-0 in game 1 and dictated. It looked, from the bits I saw, it looked like they dictated the game in terms of how they wanted it played. A lot of forced turnovers, transition, doing really well inside, between the blue lines, putting pressure on the Chill, speeding up their clock. I thought that that was the game that they wanted, and they got it. They got that early lead. The Chill did fight back and made the score pretty close. But that sort of was the Mavericks game all the way through. I know Everett Muratori with a huge game, 4 goals. A guy that he did have a few goals in the regular season, but I don't know if anybody saw a 4-goal game coming in the playoffs. That was obviously huge for them. Ethan Dumoulin answers back with a hat trick in the 8-5 loss. So the Mavericks went up 1-0 on that in that Thursday night game. And then let's go to game 2. The Chill are up 4-1. Sort of playing the type of game they wanted to play. They're in control. And then, the Mavericks fought back. A lot of credit to them. Hayden Sutherland goes off. He would score 4 in the game, including the game winner with 1:58 to go. But I think the real story lies in how we sort of arrived at that. So it's 7-6, about 8 minutes to go. And now, again, I'm not in the arena. So this isn't 100%, I'm not talking from a perspective of being right there. But I'm watching the game. There's 8 minutes left, or roughly 8 minutes. And Cash Bannister steps up over the top and blasts one in, short side low, I believe, if my memory serves me correctly. And they call a moving pick, which was, let's just say, questionable, if not egregious. That wipes out the goal. Obviously a high leverage situation. So the score goes from 7-6, from being 8-6 back to 7-6. Then a couple possessions later, the Mavericks come down, and I'm watching the game. It's in the far end, and the camera's so far away. Like, it's very hard to see exactly where the guy shot it from in relation to the net in terms of the angle, but it looked really poor. Like, where he shot it from looked like a severe angle, and you could kind of see the back of the mesh move, and I'm going like, man, that was a bad goal. But then, like, I'm thinking, well, maybe it didn't even go in, but they call it a goal. And upon further, let's just say, discussion, I've heard from 3 different people the ball never went in, that it was sitting on the back of the net, and that essentially the ref said there was a hole in the net, but there wasn't a hole in the net. Nobody ever saw that or confirmed that, and called it a goal. So the Mavericks tie the game 7-7, and then, like I said, Sutherland ends up winning the game with a massive goal, obviously, to clinch the series. Guy had 4 goals. He's a kid I know I talked about back in week 1. First time I had ever seen him. Was really impressed. He carries them in that game. Huge production. They win. I should also mention that Jordan Peck came in, and this was a very smart decision by their coaching staff to put Peck in, because he really did change that game. They were down 4-1. He comes in and he really shut the door. The Chill had a hard time, A, getting inside in the second half of the game, and B, beating him. So their deadline acquisition of Peck pays dividends. He comes up big for them. And what's at the end of the day, say what you want. I really don't care. I know this breakdown might upset some people, but I would be saying the exact same thing if it was any other team in the league. I've said, and I just finished saying many good things about this Mavericks team. So this isn't coming from a place of disrespect. These are just the facts. And I hate seeing teams' seasons end that way. It is what it is. The Mavericks have been red hot, maybe the hottest team in the league over the past few weeks here. So they're full marks for being where they are. It was just unfortunate for that game to play out the way it did. But again, Mavericks move on to take on the Silvertips after the sweep of the Chill in a series that should be really tight. And we'll get to that preview as we will with all these other previews in a second here. Keenan, got anything here with the Mavericks victory over the Chill 2-0?
You know, I hate to always, speculate, and like you said, we weren't in the arena, and everything that we're breaking down here is just a matter of he said, she said, essentially. So I mean, take it with a grain of salt, take it as you will. In my opinion, I think no matter what level of sport you play, no matter what sport you play, there's going to be bad calls, and it depends on how you push back from those bad calls, whether they be, goals called back, or in this case, maybe a goal that didn't even go in that they counted as going in, is that it doesn't matter what level you're playing, you need to find ways to win past the bad calls, and I think the Mavericks, full marks to them for, capitalizing on what was an advantageous situation for them. If I'm the Chill, I am absolutely livid. I mean, I wouldn't be happy about it either, but again, I've never played lacrosse. I've actually basically never played sports in my entire life, so funny that I'm hosting a sports podcast. But
You're an elite athlete, Keenan. Come on.
Yeah, I'm my mouth yapping. That's my elite. That's my elite sport. So full marks though to the Mavericks. I mean, in the end, I saw the Mavericks winning this series over the Chill anyway, just with how hot the Mavericks were going into the last, let's say, third of the season, give or take. I mean, that was a team that was just absolutely dominating, and then they go, like you said, pick up Jordan Peck at the deadline from the Crude, and it pays its dividends. And Jordan Peck, I feel like, has never really had a full chance to shine what he's capable of, unfortunately, just being on a Crude club that hasn't quite played up to the standard and the level that they've wanted to. So him being able to shine with the Mavericks and get them to clinch that spot in their way to the Central Division Finals is just an absolutely fantastic Cinderella story for him. And I'm really excited to see how this Mavericks and Silvertips series ends up playing out. I mean, we already know both teams are heading to the Larry Bishop just by way of the Silvertips hosting. But, it's still going to be interesting to see who takes that Central Division crown.
Yeah, and listen, I would have been very surprised if the Chill were able to go there the following day and win. The Mavericks seem to have maybe the strongest home floor out of any team right now. Any team that's gone in there, and they've played some pretty good teams of late. They've handled. So I'm not saying that this was the end all be all. Look, they were the favorites to win. They probably win game 3. But I would have liked to have seen it. I would have liked to have seen it at least given the chance. And I think that anytime a season ends in that fashion, it's got to just leave a bad taste in the guys' mouths that are involved with that. And all I hope for is that these things get corrected and we can move forward from it. But the other thing I wanted to say too is that the Mavericks and Silvertips series, I think, is going to be fascinating from the perspective of, and we'll get to this later as well, but I think it's going to be fascinating from the perspective of it might really come down to motivation, because both teams are going to be in, and a lot of it's going to be about who can be more focused and who can be more locked in terms of having that Central crown be meaningful to them and something that they want to achieve. So look for that and a little bit of another element to that series that's going to be really fascinating to watch and see how it plays out. So that's the week 1 of the playoff recap. Again, it was the Warriors, the Mavericks, and the Mountaineers all moving forward with 2-0 sweeps, and they move on to play for their division titles. And the Mavericks book their ticket for the first time into the Larry Bishop, where they'll join the Silvertips And if you're looking at the schedule, the Silver Tips will be, I would imagine they'll be the host. Although if they win, maybe that will defer to the Mavericks being the host, because the Silver Tips would be the central champion. That's probably how it will work if anybody's confused looking at the schedule. But that'll all get sorted out as we lead into the tournament. And the Warriors and Rebels will play for the North Crown, the Mountaineers and Shamrocks for the South. And of course, we also got to remind ourselves that the Kings and Blizzard still have to play for the East Crown, as those two teams had the bye with only a 3-team division. Saskatoon was out, and those two teams will play on championship weekend as well. So let's jump into these previews, and we will start with the North. So these two teams meet for the third straight year in the North Finals, the Warriors winning in 2 in 2022 and in 3 in 2023. And the Warriors, we've talked about it at length. They go and supplement their roster significantly at the deadline. The Rebels, meanwhile, stood pat. So two completely different approaches there. And these two teams, they play pretty differently as well. And we'll get into that matchup here. So the Warriors want to play in sets, 5-on-5, and on special teams, while the Rebels want to get out and run and play a game that's largely based off of turnovers and loose balls and transition. And the factor that might be at play here is the Warriors lose Bill Hunter. So a floor that they've had a lot of success on. It's a unique building now with the turf in and everything. They lose that, so they'll be playing out of service. Will that impact things? I don't know. I know the Rebels said that they like the fact that they don't have to play on the turf. They feel it slows them down. So maybe that might be a little bit of a factor. To me, this is going to come down to, I'm not sure who the Rebels are going to rely on to be their main distributor of the ball. So by that, I mean their feeder, their guy that's going to set guys up. Last year they had Xander Maxwell, who was just a massive difference maker for them. He was able to make guys around him truly better. They get Reed Lowe back, which is huge. He's a natural goal scorer. So that's going to give them another weapon on the right side. And they're going to need Baker and Kohut to be dialed in, because those two guys are shooters. They're guys that their success is generated from their outside shooting. So if their shot is on, that's going to help open up the floor for other guys. If it's not, and they're squeezing their stick a little bit, which kind of happened last year in the finals with some of those guys, that could cause some issues. Now, I want people, they should be watching out for Seth McKenzie in this series. I think he's maybe the most improved player in the league in 2024, at least in the North Division. And I think Carter McAdam and Reed Lowe are going to need to lead the way in many respects. Defensively, the Rebels are aggressive, so that's always good. You want that out of your defenders, but they can get caught at times ball watching, and they're not the fleetest of foot. So guys like Luke Royer often have a lot of success against them because they're very smart at cutting off ball and getting into the middle of the floor. So that's a matchup that might be a little difficult for them. Longmire and Scrimshaw, a couple of the better defenders in the North, they're going to have big series and really carry a lot of the weight. I know those two guys are going to be relied upon heavily to get the ball up the floor. And that's the thing. That's the strength of the Rebels, because then you add in guys like McAdam and Barrett who can really get up and go and play both ends of the floor. That's where they're going to have success, and that's how they have to play this series. I think that, the lower the scoring the games are and the uglier these games are, the better it's going to be for the Rebels. I just don't know if they have the type of defense that can limit the Warriors to 8 or less goals, which I think they might need to do in order to win this series. I think Vodchuk's really helped open up their Warrior offense in the sense that it's spaced the floor better. They've added another guy that can pass and shoot from the outside. So at the end of the day, I have a lot of respect for this Rebels organization. I think they have a vision. They draft intelligently. they have good people at the top that run them, and that they really truly care about the success of the team. They're not just there for, clout or power, right? There's a lot of teams in, not just in lacrosse, but in sports like that. And that's a team whose GM and their organization in general really care about what product they put on the floor. Despite that respect that I have for them, and I know they're going to fight, I know that they're going to be very competitive. I just don't. If I look at and I match these two teams up, there's not very many areas where I could say the Rebels have an edge, and because of that veteran experience of the Warriors and that offense, and my belief that they're going to get to 10 in both of these games, if not close to, I got the Warriors winning in 2 games. What you got?
This is definitely a series that I think we basically could see coming from near the start of the season. I mean, the Crude and the Outlaws both had rough starts to the year, and the last couple of years haven't been great for either of them. So, it makes sense that the Warriors and Rebels meeting for the 3rd consecutive year here in the North Finals. I understand your reasonings for putting the Warriors taking this in 2 games. I don't think I'm necessarily going to deny that. I've been going back and forth on Warriors in 2 or 3. The simple reason being, especially to kind of lean into what you said near the back about the defense, this is a Rebels club that in the last weekend of the season almost lost to the Beaumont Outlaws. They won, I believe it was a 10-9 final to the Outlaws, in favor of the Rebels, of course. But, if the Rebels are going to struggle against a team like the Outlaws that the Warriors just manhandled essentially from the opening minute of Game 1, I don't think the Rebels really have a chance, hence the reason for Warriors in 2. However, if the Rebels do dig down, find ways to get, keep guys from cutting in down low for the Warriors, keeping them to play on the outside and not giving them many lanes and opportunities, just a strong defense overall. And I said the same thing with the Outlaws. If they play a strong defense against the Warriors, you're going to beat the Warriors. It's even the same case for the Rebels. If you play a strong defense against the Warriors, you're going to beat the Warriors. So that's why I also say the Warriors in 3. So I don't know which I want to take more. However, gut feeling, I say Warriors in 2.
Yeah, and I think there's 2 things that I know we just picked the Warriors. There's 2 things you have to be careful with too going into this series. Is number 1, the Rebels will be healthier and more focused. They're getting guys back, so that's going to be key for them. They did finish the season pretty banged up. They sort of, at the end of the season, they were not as bad, or not to the degree as the Warriors were early in the season, but they were short, and they're adding guys that were sort of either laying in the weeds or just kind of recovering from some injuries. They could get Manning back, which would be big for them. So we'll see what their situation is. But the other thing that you have to keep in mind too is that different teams and different situations are always they're hard to handicap. Like teams will play Team A will play Team B and struggle with them, and Team B will play Team C and blow them out. So you would think, okay, yeah, Team A is going to smoke Team C, and it doesn't always work that way. So, I think that another aspect of this series that could come into play is McGilvery has the rookie goaltender for the Rebels, has the ability to steal game, and if that's the case, then suddenly this series could become really tight, because the Warriors are kind of a group that don't really feel too much pressure. They're not arrogant, but they're just very confident in themselves, and that sort of stuff doesn't seem to ever really get in their dome. But it could be a situation where, he plays really well in Game 1 and the Rebels win it. And then all of a sudden it gets very real, right? So it's a short series. I think that is something that the Rebels have in their pocket that could make a difference as well. But I'm going with my brain. My brain tells me that it's 2 games. It's not going to be easy, but I think the Warriors do it in 2 and move on to their 3rd consecutive Larry Bishop. So now let's go over to the Central, and we alluded to this, I don't know, 5-10 minutes ago. The Mavericks and Silvertips will lock horns. The Silvertips finishing first, the Mavericks finishing right behind them. A late season surge almost saw them steal home floor. And I think that's going to be key in this series. I'll get to that in a second. But, you know, both of these teams, we said this already in. So it makes a prediction here really difficult, because how do you analyze and handicap two teams' motivational levels? That we don't have psychological testing equipment, and if we did, there's no way we would be sending it out to 50 guys, 25 guys on each team, and if you want to include the coaching staffs, like 60 people, like that would just not be possible. So it's not within reason to be like, yeah, I think the Mavericks are going to come in and want this more. Like that would just mean me talking out my ass. So, but I think it will be a factor though. Like whoever is more focused and motivated here probably has an edge. I think from a mental standpoint, I think this series means more to the Silvertips because they've sort of scuffled in the second half of the season. They did finish with a nice win over Red Deer, which probably helps their confidence. And they finished first, which is also another nice thing for them. But I think from a mental standpoint, it does mean more to them to come out and win this series. They're hosting, so they're going to have a little bit of extra pressure, I think, to perform once the Larry Bishop starts. And it's tough to perform when, you know, you're coming into a tournament maybe off of a loss or whatever. So I think from that perspective, it's more important to the Silvertips. Although at the same time, the Mavericks, this is their first year, you know, their third year in the league and their first year making it this far and into the Larry Bishop. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And that's not a team that's ever going to be like, yeah, we don't care. So with that said, I think on the floor wise, I think both teams have very athletic back gates. I expect this to be a lower scoring series. I think you'll see a lot of transition looks. I think both teams have quality goaltending, but I give the edge to the Silvertips, and then, man, it's small. Like this is kind of like the Mountaineer Marauder series where I didn't really have a strong feeling either way. But I'm going to go with the Silvertips in 3 for 2 reasons. Home floor, and I've talked at length about the Mavericks' home floor being very important. They don't have it here. I think the home team probably wins every game in this series. It goes all 3. And the slight goaltending edge to the Silvertips is another difference maker. They head into the Larry Bishop Central Division champions. Keenan?
You know, I'm going to concur with you. I believe the Silvertips do end up taking this series in 3. And honestly, I think you nailed it right on the head. It's going to be home for the winners. Again, the home floor advantage, I think, for both these clubs is just absolutely important. You saw both these teams essentially dominate their home floors throughout the regular season. I do think the Mavericks bringing in Peck from the Crude does up their goaltending a bit. However, I think the Silvertips tandem was a little bit stronger throughout the season. Hence the Silvertips in 3. And I think you're correct when you say, how do you measure a team's, you know, motivation coming into a series? And the way I see this is you look at the two sides of the coin. You have the Silvertips who, I mean, temporarily lost first place to the Mavericks for, I think, a total of a couple hours just while they were finishing up their game, but they still lost first place nonetheless after being out to a dominant, like, I believe it was a 10-1-0 start. Like, just something unbelievable like that. Very Shamrocks-esque of them. So, you know, the Silvertips are going to show that they have something to prove, especially, again, like you said, with them hosting the Larry Bishop, hitting that rough patch partway through the year. They'll want to get back on good, solid feet heading into the Larry Bishop. The Mavericks, on the other hand, again, a team that is very new, making a pretty damn deep run this year. And that's just a team that's going to be trying to prove the haters wrong. I hate equating these types of things to other sports, but they're going to be in a Vegas Golden Knights type of situation where they're going to want to prove, like, hey, we're not here to mess around. We're going to try and do this. So, barring anything crazy happening, I see the Silvertips getting this in 3 by a very, very close margin, maybe a final goal differential in this series of maybe 5 total.
Yeah, no, and it could be one of those situations too, and I don't know this, but I could see it being a situation, and I don't think the Silvertips would be of this mindset, but it's possible that they would have gone, okay, we finished first in the regular season, we know we're hosting, it's not, of course you want to win, but they're not all that they're not all in on winning, or giving that little bit of extra effort and focus that it sometimes takes. And you need that against a team like the Mavericks. I could totally see a situation where the Mavericks just outwill them, and be like, we're taking this from you. So there's that possibility too. But I just logically, I give the Silvertips a little bit of an edge, and that's really the only reason why I have them winning in 3 in a series that truly could go either way. Now let's finish up with the South. And we got 2 Calgary-based teams, Shamrocks and the Mountaineers, 2 teams that have been a part of the Junior B landscape for as long as I can remember, really my whole life. So we got the Jason Crook-led side taking on, and the heavily favored side taking on the Tyrell-led Mountaineers. And the last time these 2 teams played, it was a pretty close game. It was 9-7. And it goes without saying, there's a lot of familiarity between these 2 teams. The Mountaineers and the Shamrocks, as we touched on off the top, will be playing all 3 games inside the Stupid Part Arena. So there's going to be no surprises. These teams are going to be acclimated to their surroundings pretty quickly here. And if I'm looking at this series, I think that from a strategical, or sort of how these 2 teams match up with one another, both of these teams are the Shamrocks are, and the Mountaineers are right up there as 2 of the most disciplined teams in the league. So I don't really know if that's going to come into play from a volume standpoint. And volume, I mean by just like number of penalties and things like that. But I do know that the Shamrocks hold a power play advantage probably over anyone they play, other than maybe the Warriors. So the more that this game stays 5-on-5 is probably going to help the Mountaineers, or this series stays 5-on-5, I should say. That's one thing, though, you can count on, that the special teams of the Shamrocks are always going to be very good, and they're very good at adjusting too. So if you take something away, they'll do a good job of reacting to it. And one of the things they do that I really like, I didn't see them do this as much this year, but they started to do it as the game went on against the Warriors, is they'll send their top guy into the middle, and they'll have him sort of set back picks and roll open for a pass. And then he either gets jumped, or that ball goes by that defender's ear to the guy on the crease or whatever, right? So when he gets left. So they do a really good job of manipulating the other team's short man. That could be a difference in this series. I think the Mountaineers, just from watching them play over the last couple of years in limited action I've seen, they're at their best when they're getting up and down the floor really quickly and trying to get 2-on-1s and 3-on-2s. And I think that's something that they're going to have to do to kind of take control, or try to take control of games, is to be able to throw that and throw those odd man looks and fast break opportunities at the Shamrocks. I think for the Mountaineers to win a series like this, they got to get creative. And by that, I mean, sort of throwing the kitchen sink and taking risks, like maybe pressing a little bit from time to time, maybe, sometimes letting your top guy off your defense leave early and break up the floor, try to get some breakaways. That's what it's going to take, I think, for the Mountaineers to pull this off. It's unquestionable that, that they're the underdogs here. The Shamrocks bring a lot of poise. That's probably the best word to describe the Shamrocks. Like, they're not over aggressive. They're not, at least like I don't know a lot of their players. I don't really know any of their players personally, but they never give me that arrogant sort of vibe. They're very businesslike. It takes a lot to rattle them, so they sort of stay in the moment very well. And I think the Mountaineers have to do whatever they can to sort of dictate the pace and how the game is played and played in sort of their mold. And if they do that, I think they're gonna, they can be very competitive here. I think one of these two games is really tight. Like I think you'll see a 9-7 game somewhere in this series. But I just think the Shamrocks are just too well coached, too intelligent, and too put together to lose a game here. And I think that they have just that depth. They have a clear depth advantage here, and that's why I got the Shamrocks winning in 2. But I have a lot of respect for what the Mountaineers have done this year, and their series win that they just had. And in the end, though, I got to go with the Shamrocks.
Yeah, I agree. I think the Shamrocks do end up winning this in 2. Just given the domination that they had this season, one that I think, if I'm not mistaken, they've only really seen one other season like this before, where they ended up 19-1-0 to end their year. Their only loss this year, if I'm not mistaken, I'm just going back in the score sheets here, was to the Blizz when they came out west, down into the Calgary area. So that will be something to watch, especially if the Blizz can make it past the Kings. Well, we can touch on the East real quick afterwards. In the limited amount that I've seen of the Mountaineers, I've seen them over the last couple of years when they've come up into the North, and then when some of the North teams head down to the South, it is a tale of two games. Is the Mountaineers like to play that game off the fast break. They like to make sure their opponent can't settle in, and they like to capitalize on those odd man rushes. So watch for the Mountaineers to keep that fast-paced, fast-pressure type of mentality heading into this series against the Shamrocks. Whereas the Shamrocks, on the other hand, they like to take their time. They like to slow it down, set up. They don't want to rush anything. They want to get the highest quality shot they can, the highest quality chances they can. Make sure that you're not getting guys cutting into the center or giving a guy an open lane if you don't have to. So it's really going to depend on who can play their game better. Again, with the Shamrocks' domination this year of 19-1-0, I don't see it going more than 2 games. And I do think this is another tight series where we do see like another 5-7 goal differential total in the series. However, major props to the Mountaineers for getting where they are, and if they do come out with a win and push this series to 3, even better. Makes for some great lacrosse, that's for sure. But I have Shamrocks in 2.
Yeah, and I think that there'll be one game here where the Shamrocks are able to pull away, but I really do think that they'll get a scare. Whether it's game 1 or game 2, I don't really have a feel for that, but that's sort of how I see it playing out. But another guy, one other thing I wanted to mention too is that Shamrocks do have a couple of guys that can kind of take over a series, and Kleisinger is sort of a man among boys. Like that guy is built like he's 29 years old, and he has the sheer physical ability to play everywhere on the floor and be dominant. So I think he's an X factor in that series, and if the Shamrocks are in a tight game, he might be a guy that can kind of help them separate, and I'd watch for him as these playoffs progress. I think he could be a real difference maker for them. So let's finish up here, Keenan, with the East, and I keep forgetting about it because they didn't play last week. So good thing you mentioned that, because I completely blanked on that. So you have the Kings coming in. They'll be hosting, and this is a unique setup because they play all 3 games in Regina. The higher seed gets all 3 games. So there's no traveling back and forth. They'll be in Regina for all 3, and it's the Blizzard traveling in to take on the Kings. This is really a series of, I don't want to call it like overs D, but to me it's almost like the big guns of the Kings against the physicality that the Blizzard usually present. And I haven't seen the Blizzard really at all this year, but traditionally they have size, and they have some guys that can take over the game, whether it's in transition, whether it's on the power play with a big heavy shot. They they usually have like a few guys that can beat you different ways. So I don't like this is another series. It's kind of other than the fact that I know that the Kings present some top end talent, it's hard for me to pick. But I think that ultimately the Kings are able to outscore the Blizzard. I think that they'll apply a little bit too much scoring pressure on them. I think I noted a stat where they got to double digits, the Kings, in like 14 of their 20 or 15 of their 20 games this year. So they can really fill the net. And I see them exceeding 10 goals in each game. And I think it goes 3. I think the Blizzard are a team that knows how to travel and they know how to play different types of games. So whatever way that the Kings want to play, I think the Blizzard will be able to match that pretty well. I think this could be, as much as we talked about the Silvertips and Mavericks series being really tight, this could be just as tight. And the overall goal differential could be, 3 combined goals, something like that. But I will give the nod to the Kings. They've just been slightly better this year. And their upper end, their ceiling on offense is higher. So I'll go with the Kings in 3. But I'm not shocked me. I've seen this movie so many times with the Blizzard. It would not shock me at all if they win the series and show up in Airdrie next week.
This is also another series that really intrigues me. And looking back at the season series, these two teams played 4 games against each other. They played 2 games against each other early in the season, in I believe that's week 3, and then 2 games against each other in the second to last week in week 11. And this is a series that was split right down the middle. Each team won in their own barn once and won in the opposing barn once. And this is also a series where of the 8 total scores, only 3 of them were above 10, and 1 of them was above 11. So this is, historically this season, been a very tight checking kind of game between these two clubs. And, you look down the kind of roster of teams, and the Kings, I think, end up winning this series in 3 as well. I think the Blizz find a way to win at the Al Ricci, as they evidently have already done this year. But watch for the Kings' firepower. Definitely, they want to head to the Larry Bishop. The Blizzard were there last year, and I believe it was the Kings who they may have beat last year. I don't recall what that East final was. Yeah. So look for the Kings to get some revenge, similar to how the Mounties got it against the Marauders this year. And yeah, I think the Kings end up taking this, but again, Blizzard take it. That won't surprise me to see either of these clubs in Airdrie come August long weekend.
That is a good point too. The fact that they walked in there last year and beat them in 2 straight games, that'd be tough. That'd be tough to sort of live with, I think, if you're a lot of those Kings players, having the same team walk into your building and beat you 2 years in a row and knock you out and prevent you from going to the provincials. And I think there's probably enough motivation from that there alone that could make a little bit of a difference, at least for the Kings. But that's going to be a tight series. Both of those teams have consistently won all season, and obviously in tough spots too, because they have some weird scheduling sort of constraints. So we'll see what happens there, but that's going to be another really tight series. I don't think this is saying a whole lot, but I expect this weekend's playoffs to have a little bit more drama than round 1.
Absolutely. It's not going to be a weekend of sweeps.
No, I'd be very surprised. Even though I picked 2 out of the 4 to be sweeps, it would shock me if all 4 go that way. Because even the 2 that I picked sweeps in, I could see one of those 2 teams, particularly the Rebels, maybe sneaking a game in. But we'll see. Time will tell. We're getting really close now. The second round starts in a few days here, so we're recording on a Monday night, and we'll have more segments here to come as we put together the pod for the week. But I just want to thank everybody for tuning in. It's been a hell of a ride here in 2024 as we approach Larry Bishop. As always, you can hit me up, MJ_9 on Twitter /X and M.Joma on Instagram. Keenan, I want to thank you for taking the time here with me tonight. Anything you want to add here?
Yeah, of course. I would just want to thank everybody for tuning in this year. Just a reminder, we will not be having a podcast next week because instead we will be doing a live podcast on the Friday, August 2nd. That is going to be live from the Larry Bishop Memorial Tournament, and Muhammad and I will have all the action for you. We will round up who is there and what the matchups look like in day one. And who knows, you never know who might pop by during that podcast. So thank you so much for tuning in to the Junior Beast. My name is Keenan, for my co-host Muhammad. Thank you so much. Make sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. You'll be notified every time we go live in the second round of the playoffs and heading into the Larry Bishop Memorial Cup. And as always, have a good week.
And in advance, Keenan, as we end this pod, Mavericks, chill out.